Black-only graduation ceremony isn't the opposite of diversity.
So where was a black-only celebration?
Columbia University.
Okay, and why was it black-only?
Good question.
No, I mean literally, like what was the rule that made it black-only?
Because they said they're uncomfortable around white people.
It was a black-only graduation. Why are we beating around the bush here?
Alabama, it is, absolutely the case where we are producing naturally through the free market, if you want to put it on that, a segregated world, right? So then you have to think about, well, why? Why are people still naturally, behaviorally keen to segregate, right? And it's easy, I think, for two white people, myself and you both grew up in pretty similar circumstance, I'm sure, a middle-ish class life and in the Navy, and lots of diversity. I also thought we were living in like a post-race world, right? If we can't talk about race, how are we going to foster an environment where people feel comfortable being with people that they don't feel are in their racial tribes, right? So if we decide that any conversation about race is by inherently racial or racist, as your terminology goes, it makes it very difficult, I think, for people who are interested in coalition building, community building, dealing with like what we would call de facto segregation, so not by law, but by behavior. And I guess I would be interested to hear, if we don't want to talk about diversity, how do we achieve those goals, since you seem very keen to be living in a post-racial
Rachel, your time
world.
is up.
I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think majority of people have a problem with just having diversity. And what do I mean by that? I don't think majority, and I mean a large majority, like 90, 95, 99% probably, don't have a problem with seeing diverse schools, seeing diverse work environments, seeing diverse malls, seeing diverse anything. I don't think most people have a problem. I think most people have a problem with forced diversity, where it gets to the point that you are practically giving one race an advantage over another race. I think people have a problem with that. And I think that's what causes a lot of turmoil, and that leads to people not wanting to talk about race, including race in decision making. Because when you say that we are forcing diversity, like, for example, no matter what, we'll have a racial quota of people, why wouldn't it be a problem?
Yeah, I mean,
You have 1 minute.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was raised in that country. I went to a high school that was 53% Hispanic. Mm-hmm. I was a minority as a white Christian male, and no one talked about race, and it was great. We talked about character. So, like, I don't need to be, like, lecturing in some sort of hypothetical world. I was raised in that world, and it was awesome. Everyone got along. Mm-hmm. I mean, you were in the Navy, or you grew up around the Navy, that's right, and so maybe you have your own different experience with that. But the more we talk about race, the more we actually bring those demons of our past to the forefront. Like, we're actually producing racism, we're manufacturing it. There's a supply and demand problem with racism in our country, where there's an incredible demand to try to find it, and we're trying to increase the supply of it. And when you have playgrounds in Denver where you say white families are not allowed to come, black families only, how is that not just reinstituting the same segregational policies that we said were evil in the 1930s and 40s, which they are, and then just flipping it on its side to say, actually, now we're going to be racist to white people, which is actually the creed of Ibram X. Kendi. He says segregation today to fix segregation of yesterday.
I mean, I won't do the typical liberal thing, which would be to point out, the statistics about home ownership.
I would actually want her to point out the statistics, because what a lot of people do, they do this a lot with the black community specifically. Every time they talk about liberalism or they talk about racial prejudice, the black community is always brought up as the focal point of unfairness and inequality in society. They always say black families own less homes, or black families get paid less, or black families get married less, or black families commit more crimes. They don't have the higher reading levels. They say all these things to practically say the reasons why the black community is struggling in some sense is because of racism. And I hate that argument, because it's simply a fallacy. It's not true. Just because a community is struggling does not inherently mean another community is oppressing them. Have you ever thought about cultural differences? A culture can push something that another culture doesn't, and that's just what it is. But they always use a marginalized or a lower earning community to justify their belief that critical race theory and racial social programs are justified. And it's not really a logical argument to me, but let's continue.
And historic racism and you know, why you might need affirmative action to achieve diversity, because I think that will just take us down a rabbit hole. And I really want more, I think, to talk about the substance of, you know, America. So it is true that when we were children, and I'm 10 years about older than you, you know, we did not have curriculum that dealt with diversity and inclusion at all. And like the American for Disabilities Act was in its infancy. So like programs for students like my son with autism were few and far between in K through 12. So we're really talking about a school environment now that has been spending, I don't know, 20 years kind of building up an infrastructure that's more focused on, you know, community building exercises, getting people to be accepting and tolerant of others, reducing school bullying and, you know, suicide and issues with kids. And I just don't know how we can have a conversation without mentioning race when we're talking about, you know, an inclusive environment.
Like, do you think there's something, I'm just going to ask a question. Do you think there's something morally wrong with black-only graduation ceremonies?
So I would argue that there is definitely something wrong with anything that is exclusive, unless we're talking about a situation where you talk about being a minority in your house.
She didn't really even answer the question. She didn't answer the question. When he said a black-only graduation, that question automatically should imply exclusivity. It should not imply inclusivity. If someone says a white-only graduation, if someone asks you, are you okay with the white-only graduation? Imagine someone answered and said, well, I guess it depends. I'm not really a fan of anything that... What? Just say yes or no. No. It's not okay. It's okay to say no.
High school, right?
Well, certainly not a minority in the country, but yes, in the high
and
school.
I also went to a very diverse high school. It was at least 50% African American, right? And you know, the thing that I noticed about it, for me, it was a real shock the first day I enrolled, because I came from a smaller city first and moved into that, to see like, oh, this is the first environment I've ever sat in where not everyone's white, right? I mean, at least half the people around me were black. And you know, what I would have liked back then is some direction on getting to know people from a different world, right? Like our problem is siloing too much, right? With all the technology we have, we're only hanging out with people that agree with us, come from our own walk of life. For example, when you mix people together, you get things that you could not have in a homogenous environment with one representative of that minority group. So I just, you know, I think it's important to keep in context that too, like the America that I grew up in the 80s and the 90s for you is much more diverse, right? So we, I don't see the need for diversity and inclusion education for perpetuity,
but isn't like, for example, a black-only graduation ceremony, isn't the opposite of diversity?
So where was a black-only celebration?
Columbia University.
Okay, and why was it black-only?
Good question.
No, I mean literally, like what was the rule that made it black-only?
Because they said they're uncomfortable around white people.
Oh, really? So it was a private ceremony.
It was a black-only graduation. Why are we beating around the bush here? It was a black-only graduation. What are you doing? Who cares why they said it's black only?
Yes, yeah. White people weren't allowed.
You know what? I'm going to be very steady across things. And when I was teaching in Georgia, I had found out that there was a high school in Georgia still doing a whites-only prom.
I think that's evil.
In 2012, dude. It was like 2013.
I think that's evil.
You can Google it. It's true.
And you agree that? Like,
no, and definitely. And the way that they were doing that, by the way, is going into private education, which is really important conversation I think we should have, because when you're in the private sector, you can do things like black only or white only. And I definitely agree that we want to.
Not anymore. Civil Rights Act disallows that, but we could talk about that in a sec. So you live in Oregon?
I do.
Yeah, there's a black-only school that's been chartered. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I have not looked at that, so I'm not going to comment on that at all.
Right.
But, you know, to me, imagine...
Suburbs of Portland, yeah.
So here's one thing that really sticks with me. Have you ever read the book Caste by Isabella Wilkerson? No. Okay. I read that book. It was a hard read, and history is a hard read. If we, take a hard look at all history, not just the U.S. history, right?
Yeah.
I've been studying world civilization pretty intensely over the last year, and there's commonalities in human behavior that are not unique to America.
I agree.
Right? So to me, like
our story's exceptional, but yeah, for sure.
It is. It's an exceptional story, but there are things that are commonalities between us and other people in other countries,
Yeah,
right?
I totally agree.
And one thing that humans unfortunately have a default setting to is violence and intolerance.
This conversation has been very informative so far.
She said we have a predisposition to violence and intolerance, which, historically speaking, yes, you can say that. My only problem with history, the way history is taught, is that we usually tend to only focus on the negative things. But I will agree, we do have a predisposition to a lot of violence. I hope she doesn't lead this back to modern day racism or modern day discrimination, because unlike historical times, America has a clear set book of rules that disallows humans from discrimination. You will get sued, your business can get shut down, there will be real punishments. And also, we are a very civilized society. We are extremely civilized. So I hope that's not the path she's going down, but let's continue.
Let's keep the good dialogue going. Rachel, let's pick up with you.
So all right. It's difficult to imagine what it would be like to be in a place where you stood out a lot, right? I mean, you're a handsome guy, so you
Thank
stand
you.
out that way.
Most of my detractors would completely disagree.
Oh, you got the hair.
You're the first liberal to ever call
that
me
hair
handsome.
is just, to die for.
Oh.
Yeah.
You quote that, everybody.
Charlie Kirk has hair to die for.
There you go.
There you go. But other than that, don't take this now. I'm going to let you down.
Oh, here
You're
we go.
pretty nondescript, right? And so am I. And, I don't know that we can understand what it would be like to be not nondescript in the sea of people who all have this commonality and you do not, right? So I think, when we think about what diversity and inclusion education, which is to me more useful to talk about than a legal
No, that's
theory.
fine. But I'm using examples of how we're actually organizing education.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So at Western Washington University, they have black-only dorms. That's the opposite of diversity.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine if you were let's say you're 10% of a university, like CNU had fantastic racial diversity, still like 20%, right?
So if I went to an HBCU, which I wouldn't, I don't know if I would get in or not, but I guess they can't discriminate race, and I had a white-only dorm, that would be bad.
Yes, because you're at a black college.
Oh my gosh, bro. The fact that she really can't understand what she's saying is starting to piss me off. So, if it's not an HBCU, the schools are actually called PWIs, which stand for predominantly white institutions. That's what the acronym stands for. So it's okay if an HBCU, which stands for historically black college or university, has a white-only dorm. Well, it's not okay if they have a white-only dorm. But it is okay if whatever school you want to say that's a predominantly white institution has a black-only dorm, and your justification for this was, well, yeah, you can't have a white-only dorm at an all-black college. So if a college is 90% white, you can't have an all-black dorm. It's the same logic. Why is one okay, but the other isn't? And this is my problem. I'm not trying to be biased, but come on, bro. You can't outwardly support discrimination only when it benefits a minority group. I don't trust people who do that, because discrimination is discrimination. I would rather you be completely fair across the board. Then I'm like, okay, I know what your morals are, I know what your principles are, but someone like this, who just says, oh, it's only okay when this group does it, it really makes it hard for me to trust your decision making.
It would be weird, right?
Yeah, so do you get what I'm saying? No, it's this is no longer theory. We're
Yeah, but I mean, think about it the other way. Not
education.
every black student can afford a private tuition at HBCU. They're extraordinarily expensive, right?
Western
And
Washington,
usually competitive for admissions. So, if you go to a normal university, and the University of Georgia is a great example of this, because we both hate their football program, because
totally
it has our
agree.
natty.
Yeah.
Our natty.
We stole their football coach.
No, we did. We did get revenge, didn't we, Charlie? Give me. There we go. Nah, damn Lenny. All right. Anyway, you distracted me. But at University of Georgia, where the population of that state is 30%. Okay, 30%
Black. Yes.
Black. The university's student body, when I was there for that 4 or 5 years, was only 10% black.
Right.
So
Because Georgia has a large majority of HBCUs. They have the trifecta of HBCUs. It's called Spellhouse. They also have Clark Atlanta. And like you said, those schools are extremely competitive. They're called HBCUs for a reason. A lot of black people go to these schools. That's why they're called that. So if you're in Georgia, students in this area typically just will choose to go to one of those 3 HBCUs, which are in the triangle of schools. And there's also schools near there that are HBCUs. And also, if they don't want to go to the HBCUs, there's just a lot of schools near that area. So I know what you're trying to do here, but I don't think it's going to work out the way you think.
well, imagine then if like I'm trying to guess. I guess I'm trying to explain, like, what would it be like if we took Charlie Kirk and dropped him in an African country where he was the minority student? He would probably feel lonely and want to have programs that help
Well,
him.
look, I mean,
An African country? What are you talking about? You think the equivalent of a black kid going to an PWI is the equivalent of dropping a white American citizen in an African country? How is that the same? Do you realize if I go to a PWI, I'm still American. It's still an American school. I'm not getting dropped into a new country with people who speak different languages in a land that I'm not accustomed to. Oh my gosh. If I go to a school, bro, just because the people are different races than me does not mean we act different. We act the same. We're all just young adults. We're probably pursuing the same dreams. We probably have the same major. What makes you think they're gonna have different customs than me, bruh? That's kind of racist? Is it because I'm black? I can't watch this anymore. If you have any suggestions for me, comment down below. It's LFR Jojo, and I'll see you next time.